My name is Iftikhar Dadi. I'm the director of the Cornell South Asia program, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you to today's presentation. Before I introduce our speaker and the topic, I just wanted to bring your attention to our upcoming events. So tomorrow, an event that is relevant to South Asia is Constituting Afghanistan, Rediscovering Afghan Legal History. And this is by Faiz Ahmed. And this is in person at 4:30 tomorrow. On the 29th of September, we have another in-person event, which is sponsored by the Johnson Museum. This is by Marina Najat Haider, who's the Nasir Sabah Al Ahmed Curator of Islamic Art at the Metropolitan Museum, and it's an event co-sponsored by the South Asia program. And our next talk, which is in the South Asia program series, is Monday, October 3rd, The Unlivable City, Food and Embodied Ambivalence in India's IT Capital. And this is an in-person talk. So we have this semester, we have a combination of virtual and in-person talks. Our in-person talks are normally at 12:15 and the virtual talks are at 11 a.m. So I'm very happy that we have Professor Seuty Sabur presenting today on locating the affluent middle class in Dhaka, Bangladesh, which is part of her larger book project. Professor Sabur is Associate Professor of Anthropology at Brack University. She received her PhD in sociology from the National University of Singapore, teaches a wide variety of and range of courses, and in terms of her work has been an activist and academic based in Bangladesh, and has drawn and been involved with multiple recent social movements. She is widely published, and the current book project she's working on is called Marriage and Friendship, Social Networks of the Bangladeshi Affluent Middle Class. So I'm handing over to Professor Sabur.
Thank you, Professor Iftikhar Dadi, Daniel Bus, and the team at Cornell South Asia program for inviting me for the seminar. I'll be presenting a chapter of my book titled as Locating Affluent Middle Class in Dhaka, which I have just finished writing. I just finished yesterday. So the material is very new, and I'd love to have your feedback on that. So I'll be mostly reading, so bear with me. Let me share the screen. I do have some picture. So the presentation map looks like this. So I will start with discussion of affluent middle class, and we'll talk about their arrival in the city, how they made the living, and what kind of accumulations they have, and whether that has contributed to the class position they are in. I look into education or cultural capital, occupation or economic capital, their domesticity and consumption pattern, and their social capital, to look into the constitution of middle class, or what do we understand by middle class. So I will start with this small short story. So this is a conversation I had with one of my interlocutors who just passed away. So I will start with Marina's story of arrival. So it was one of the hot summer afternoon at her place at Green Road, which kind of the house resembles 1960s and 70s architecture. So I asked Marina casually, so when did you arrive? I mean, that is a question we usually ask in South Asia, especially in Bangladesh. And then she actually answered my question with the question and said, Green Road or Bangladesh? So I didn't pause, and she actually continued. So in her narrative, she says that we all were caught by the post-father death syndrome. We stayed in Calcutta until my father died in 1947. He died living dead, even being the viceroy's counselor. After my father's death, we were still many going to school. We had been shuttling between pillars to post. Some of us were with my eldest brother, some of us were with eldest sister. We were trying to complete our education that way. Mother was still alive, but could not hold such a big family for long. My father never built anything, so we were left practically with nothing. Kamrunisa, my elder sister, was a BABT. She got married to AKM Alim. He was a self-made businessman. They belonged to Haltu Dhakuria. He continued his business until 1952 in newly independent India, but increasingly he found it difficult to sustain in Calcutta. So he moved to Dhaka. We all came with him. End of quote. Marina was one of the many migrants who arrived in Dhaka between 1940s and early 50s. For many of these migrants, relocation was a practical choice influenced by the changing material conditions triggered by partition. Lines were drawn, borders marked, and families were broken and divided. Dhaka became the destination or the home for many Bengali Muslims and some handful of other people of other ethnicities who longed for a separate identity and chose to be part of Pakistan. So that was not Bangladesh yet. The arrival of the Muslim middle class was instrumental in formation of East Pakistan, which brought about massive shift in political field. Every metropolitan city embodies countless stories of arrival like Meherunisa's. Dhaka was no exception. In this chapter, I attempt to make a section of this class tangible, locating them in space and time using memoir, genealogies, intergenerational family histories of my 6 key interlocutors, and long interviews with 80 families. These intergenerational narratives reveal how the spatial mobilities, birth, marriage, work, and retirement were entwined with the accumulations of various capitals and how they collided with Dhaka's urban formation as a metropolitan city. With each wave of arrival came hope and aspiration. And with each wave, the city grew and transformed into accommodate and give shape to these aspirations. So when we talk about capital, I'm particularly using Bourdieu's concept of economic, social, and cultural capital, his idea of distinction. I look into the neo-Marxist framework of gender nation formation, or gendered class formation, to look into into the middle class formation. I don't want to spend too much time on the theoretical framework. If you are interested, we can have some conversation after the talk. The city began to regain its prominence when it was made the provincial capital of Bengal from 1905 to 11. Dhaka could only truly thrive after partition when it became the capital of East Pakistan. The city had undergone significant transformation in 1950s. After partition, it had to house increasing number of government offices, employees, firms, industrial establishment, and influx of Muslim migrants from India and other parts of the province. Many of these migrants were allotted houses in old Dhaka. So I'll give you a, so this is the old Dhaka. I'm still in a process of acquiring this, the map, original map of this one. So this was the Dhaka in 1840, and this is the Dhaka in 1929. So old part of Dhaka was, this is the city plan from 1929. I'll keep this, this map here, and we'll see how this part of old Dhaka actually grew bigger. This was 2 decades back, and this is what Dhaka looks right now. So this is the old part of Dhaka. Some of this arrival, so what happened is that many of these migrants actually occupied the abandoned Hindu houses during the and after partition. Some managed to exchange their properties in India with properties in Bangladesh, while others occupied whatever they found. By 40s and 50s, Dhaka became a retirement home for many Bengali Muslim imperial servants. Many of them settled in Purana Palton Shegun Bagicha, which emerged as a residential area for affluent middle class and elite in 1940s. So this was adjacent to Old Dhaka. As the capital of East Pakistan, Dhaka went through 25 years of political turbulence and culminated with the Liberation War in 1971. Newly independent Bangladesh created unfathomable opportunities for middle class and attracted aspiring members of this class to urban centers, especially in the capital. Dhaka has been home for my interlocutors for many, many generations, and they had arrived in waves in different juncture. So the first generation arrived in Dhaka around 1947 before partition, and the second wave after partition between 1948 to 1970, and third wave after the Liberation War of 1971. Some of this arrival were led by the parents' retirement or death, while the rest were led by education, occupation, marriage, among other things. This vast pool of individuals, from this vast pool of individuals, Ahmed Kabir, Dilmunwara, Mehrunissa, Mansura, Tamanna, Irfan represented the first generation of my key interlocutors. Almost all of them belonged to families of professionals. Their parents had been the first generation of Muslims to engage in diverse professions such as education, law, civil service, and were deeply embedded in the British imperial wage economy. Tertiary education and occupation became integral part of that aspiration of emergent Muslim middle class. They were successfully transmitted to the next generation, something quite apparent among my interlocutors regardless of their gender. Ahmed Kabir explained this eloquently, the zeal for education. He says that as a response to the religion-based intergenerational deprivation that haunted colonial Bengal. In his words, 47 onward, Bengali Muslim emerged. My father was government officer in British India. He opted for Pakistan and came to Dhaka in 1947. We were bearing the colonial legacy. Colonial rulers wanted us to be divided and were separated. My father generation had to compete with the Hindu for this position, the position that he held. They had a secular zeal to do well, to survive the competition and fight discrimination. That was the only choice for us, he emphasized. This part of Bengal was always deprived. We never had bitto or possession. What we had was zeal to learn and educate ourselves. Educated Muslim from India impacted the emergence of middle class in Bangladesh. This middle class has led the society ever since, end of quote. For Kabir, the education and occupation were the only tool Muslim middle class had to consolidate their class position in newfound East Pakistan. This actually brings us to the beautiful stories of survival as a Muslim middle class and opportunities they envisioned in a post-colonial nation state. However, discrimination and migration continued long after partition. Despite of this deprivation, not all Muslim in Bengal felt the need to leave or migrate unless there was a major catastrophe in the family. Often, the death of the critical earning member in the immediate family or insufficient property or social support led to the break of the extended family and migration. For instance, Tamanna's father died at the age of 39 in Kolkata. He was a tax and excise officer. Her mother, Munujan, did not have the means, but had the foresight to raise and educate her 6 children. Instead of living with her in-laws in Bakura, so she had to move from Kolkata to Bakura, one of the villages in West Bengal. Munujan settled with, so she left Bakura, and Munujan settled with her brother in a large extended family in Maubajar in 1960. These everyday resistance contributed to the shift in gender role and domesticity, which I'll discuss in my next section. Now, from so this was the stories before 71. So The Liberation War ravaged the city in 1971, yet it became the heart of newly independent Bangladesh and stand as a reminder of resilience of the people of the city. The city offered new opportunities for professionals, technocrats, bureaucrats, class identity in a new nation. Some of them embodied the historic transition of Muslim middle class by holding multiple allegiance to 3 nations they have served in their lifetime before settling in Dhaka. Ghulam Murshid was one of them, who was one of those handful of civil servants who served under the British Raj as an education inspector, then moved to textile directorate in Karachi after partition and retired as the last governor of Bank of Pakistan in Dhaka. Finally, Murshid and his wife Khairunisa settled in their Dhanmandi house in 1971. So this is Dhanmandi then, 60s and 70s. This is the Dhanmandi now. The intergenerational family history revealed that the spatial movement coincided with the city's movement from south to north between 1947 to 2018. My interlocutors' spatial relocation suggested that the city has continued to expand towards the north since 1970. Historically, the northern and western part of Dhanmandi, Banani Gulshan, and its adjacent area accommodated the elite and affluent middle class exclusively. So this is Gulshan in 80s. And this is Gulshan now. This is very close to my house. So we will move away from the stories of arrival in this section where I talk about the making of living and shift in domesticity. In this section, we'll shift the lens to the collective struggle of this class, with a focus on the first and second generation and some on third generation. The question that I ask or try to grapple with is that how did they make the living in the city? So they arrived in the city, then how do they make a living in the city? How did men and women organize their lives and put down their roots? It is clear from the earlier discussion that the lived experience and struggle varied considerably across generation. Here I focus on education, occupation, domesticity, and cultural capital to grapple with this intergenerational transitions. I will argue that only the intergenerational data enable us to decipher encapsulated time-space continuum of middle-class formation. This is something that I really, really like about having family as a unit of analysis. I know it sounds very, very methodical, but what I really like is that from the family histories and intergenerational histories, you can actually, it like a 3D movies that you are watching across the generation, longitudinally and latitudinally. So we'll first talk about education a little bit. So education or cultural capital. So it's not only education, but other forms of other sets of skill that we'll talk about. So education for middle class is both aspirational and projection of how they want to be seen by the world they're embedded in. It is not a mere means of survival for them, but a tool to assert claim to social class, status, and power. My first generation of interlocutor hailed, as we have talked already, from the educated Muslim families, and they ensured, so the first generation ensured their descendant attained tertiary education and aspired to become professionals. By entering the wage economy, my interlocutors not only distanced themselves from the agriculture, but also foreclosed such possibility for their children, even when they had the inherited ancestral land and the properties. Therefore, by 1950s, tertiary education, professional degrees became the only way to achieve upward mobility. However, having large families and little or no surplus from the ancestral property, most families struggle to meet end with the salaried income. Hence, state subsidized education facilitate the process of consolidating the class. So when you have little money, but you had this huge, robust state infrastructure, a nation building project, where education was almost free. So it kind of fostered the growth of this class. So it's 124 of my interlocutors benefited from such system, achieved their tertiary education in public universities, medical colleges, engineering universities. Many scholars associated urge for education and employment as a modern masculine trait, especially Renu Mahmed and Manoj Chaudhary in their one of those articles, while the role of women education were reduced to become eligible for marriage market and raise children, which is also argued by Hilary Standing and Renu Mahmed's earlier work. But my research actually contained this assumption. In an earlier chapter, I showed how feminine nationalist movement, riot led women to organize themselves to respond to this crisis. This crisis also bred a very different kind of women. So the political formation actually allowed women the space to articulate their desire to be in public. So they not only persisted through it all, but helped to emancipate their families. Mumtaz Begum was one of those who paid hundreds of thousands of women. She was a lawyer, one of the first female MABT LLB in Bengal, and MLA of Undivided Bengal, and later in Jukto Front cabinet. And he was one of the representative in UN General Assembly in Undivided Pakistan. Now, it may sound like she's one of the most radical women, but even for her, she had to wait for her children to grow up and complete her graduate education. Apart from being successful in her career and politics, she also inherited a large amount of patrimony from her parents in the form of gold, which she actually sold to for better education of her husband and purchasing property. She was only 13 when she got married. Now, nevertheless, for second generation, education remained not only a tool to enter the class, but a marker of distinction. With the surplus in income, education became a brand in which families were ready to invest to secure their children's future. The inherited family affluence was the key to what one can achieve in life. The preference for a particular medium of education, whether it's Bangla or English or educational institution, became associated with class aspiration. The very choice of school or college by parents may lead to membership of a particular network or reproduction of such social network. It was not coincidental that 154 of my interlocutors had achieved undergraduate degree and 104 of them have attained postgraduate qualification from most prestigious public and private universities, medical college, engineering universities in Bangladesh. And 11 of my interlocutors got their education from Oxford, Sussex, King's College, Lincoln's Inn, Birmingham, and Melbourne University. Like education, occupation was one of the key factor in formation of middle class. Muslim entering into the wage economy in 20th century was the most crucial element in a middle class formation in East Bengal. This was an act of defiance, I would say, against the caste Hindus, zamindars, and officers with whom they had been fighting for resources for decades. The quota for Muslim in education and occupation under the Raj ignited an aspiration for separate nationhood and identity. These rebels were the predecessors of the first generation of my interlocutors who made Dhaka their home after partition. First generation of my interlocutors chose safe professions such as civil service, medical engineering, teaching, law, banking, architecture, and other managerial jobs. These jobs actually provided the security and retirement benefits. This was essential to have stable footing in the city. Many of them not only raised immediate family, but member of the extended family too. In many cases, women were directly involved in financial management and often better at it. For instance, Ahmed Kabir joined Army Engineering Corps soon after he finished his graduation. He could not work there for too long because of his ideological differences, because he was jailed during the language movement in 1952. The resistance towards the Pakistani regime was already brewing, and he was not very happy at the position. So yet he chose the government service. He joined the Water and Power Development Authority. He met and soon after he got his second job, he met Nazma through her brother when she was just completing her matriculation and got married in 1963. Nazma proved to be the boon to the family. Towards the end of the government service, Ahmed Kabir became an agent of international firm named General Electronics. And Nazma actually gave him the idea and co-founded the Engineering International, the first of its kind. This particular company powered Dhaka, Chittagong, and all the major cities during that time. She utilized Ahmed's knowledge as a purchaser as Wabda and built a network with British, German, and American companies to conduct the work. She managed office, project, and joint family and increased the family accumulations by manyfold. Some of my first generations of interlocutors completely shattered the gender image of ideal occupation and home and showed us revolutionary possibilities. Tamanna was one of those brave women. She married Shafiuddin Ahmed, a Communist Party whole-timer, in 1970s. She was a doctor and a family sole earner. She worked in infectious disease hospital later, and she was serving at the field hospital in 1971, and having only a child of few months, actually carried her and was in the battlefield, giving the aid. Later, she joined the Atomic Energy Commission in 2004. She ran her diagnostic center parallelly. She chose to be in a profession and was active in politics all her life. And she's one of the key leader in women's movement now. Now, this was the case during, this was the case for my first and second generations of interlocutor. However, the age of market liberalization in late 1980s and 90s caused significant shift in occupation pattern. The neoliberal turn produced a boom in private sector with a massive inflow of aid and capital to support development projects, through which the neoliberal aspiration of managerial state was realized. Most of my second generation and third generation of interlocutors worked in a private sector, as a senior or mid-level managers or senior executives. Others were engaged in specialized professions such as doctor, engineer, and others. The lowest salary range of my informants were interlocutors were 30,000 taka per month and 78,000 taka as a basic salary. They were constituted top range of salary class if we consider the 8th pay scale, 8th pay commission as standard. This may be regarded as the affluent section of the middle class. Now come to domesticity. Middle-class men have often been associated with public and women with private in discourse of domesticity in South Asia. This perception emanated from the long shadow cast by Victorian moral and how it produced its colonial subject, mostly done by Sinha, Amin, Standing, and Ahmed, and others. But by the turn of I argue that by the turn of 20th century, and post-colonial nation of Bangladesh, such influence started to wane. Women and men responded to major political formation and realigned their class and gender role, both in their private life and in public life. And following cases would help us to understand how men and women became the equal partners, helped each other to put their root down in the city. One of the major things that is quite interesting. What I thought that I would find mostly nuclear family when I entered the field, but to my surprise, I see that the joint family were seen as a residue of large agrarian families and was very prominent until 1970s. So 1950s and 70s, all these families that I've talked about, for at least for a couple of years, they lived in an extended family, joint or extended family. The family history suggests that urbanization and entrance into the wage economy did not immediately translate it into nuclearization of family as much as earlier work would suggest, as by Ahmed and Chaudhry. The transition continued until 1970s. The member of usually in joint families, member would create a common pool of resources to meet the family's need, and it is usually the eldest men who would lead the household, and women would complement the role. The joint family ran its course only when the members are not equally invested, or the increase in number of the family members and causing the shortage of space. Not all joint family ended because of the family feud. Joint families sustained for for so long because it also provided the space for newlywed to organize their life before they moved to the nuclear household. Family history suggests that the companion marriage and domestic life was possible in the middle of chaos of joint family. These families also provided much required child and elderly care in urban setup, which is absolutely absent. State is absolutely absent when it comes to child care and elderly care. So families actually supported that. More often, this burden fell on the women's shoulder, and women were highly exploited. I don't want to deny the fact. But even then, it was eventually distributed among the women within the family according to age and experiences. There were hierarchy within the support network, and yet people like Tamanna who were working outside could tap into the skin support or use the social capital to build the life she and her family desired. She had no choice but to juggle family, profession, and political life simultaneously. When asked about the domesticity and multitasking, she responded nonchalantly, domesticity has its own mechanism and runs accordingly. There is nothing much to do. But she also acknowledged her enormous support system comprised of in-laws and how they contributed to raising her child and running the family while she was away. From above mentioned cases encapsulates the nuclearization process family, yet they are deeply rooted in the extended family for mutual support across generation. This also reveals the heterogeneity of role across generation and how women negotiated their domestic and public life, while men played their traditional role of patriarch with new sensibilities as a companion. Women could never release themselves from domesticity, rather intervene whenever supposed matriarch failed to do so or in their absence. Often they had to overcompensate for having desired to pursue a career and juggle multiple lives. But interestingly, among 150 second and third generation of my interlocutors, women were professionals, and 60% of the women were supporting the family, and 32 actually, almost 40% of the women were co-heading the household. So it was not only men who were the head of the household, but it was men and women shared the burden equally. But I am talking about mostly it was a nuclear family and the third generation, meaning our time. Women are playing the key role of household head and manage the household together with their partner. Dual income families are the reality of contemporary middle class, without which it is difficult to maintain a desired lifestyle. That brings us to the issue of consumption. What the increase in surplus income and how that is utilized or materialized, and how it kind of given middle class a new identity. The consumption pattern of middle class has transformed from basic to aspirational within 3 generations. The first and second generation were keen to savings and turning them into asset, while by the third generation, this had become a debt based class. A substantial portion of this salary is spent behind paying different debts, credit card bills. Position of individual within this aspirational class was no longer determined by the income and accumulation, rather his or her credit worth. Also, this is a very interesting turn because the presentation of self has become dominant part of the middle class aesthetics. Hence, a large amount of money. So if you look into this graph, you will see the amount of money they spend monthly on things like groceries regular, but hanging out, wearing brand clothes, accessories, going to beauty salon, gymnasium, and tour. So this is something. This is a move away from, as Bourdieu would say, taste of senses to taste of reflection. So middle class is not only it's not about the survival anymore, but it is also what they aspire to be, how they want to be, reflect themselves as, and project themselves. So it is a taste of reflection. So it's a move away, by third generation, it's a move away from its original position. The affluent middle class has always maintained a rich social network and accumulation of social capital over the years. The nature of aggregate of the social capital changed this class across generation. While the first generation banked on their extended kin and professional network, by second and third generation, we see that network has expanded into constituting of kin, friends from school, college, and university, colleagues from the similar field, and associates. Middle class is way richer now by third generation in terms of social capital, because they can maneuver the social network in time of need and for special privileges. And Bangladesh runs on special privileges. We love special privileges. So almost all my key interlocutors nurture a wide range of network of family friends, which transcends the generation. This is very interesting. And I find it very interesting because this capital doesn't stay with you, because it's not only you or your friends, but your friends are also, you are casting wider net for your children. So you are investing, you are actually like any other capital, the way it would be passed down to your children, the social capital is also passed down onto their children. And it's very interesting. 43 of this member of my interlocutors were part of this voluntary organization, which they regularly go. So Lions Club, Rotary, political organizations, women's organizations, and they meet their member of this associations at least once a week, if not 5 times a week. This formal and informal meetings contribute to the maintenance of the social network for this class. I unveil the detail of the social transaction of middle class in next chapter. Almost all of my interlocutors invest money, effort, energy to sustain this relationship. Social transaction takes place through occasional visits and attending social events. I am almost at the end of my, my talk. So this is what it culminates into. If you go through the generations, you can see how the accumulation progressed over the generations. So these are my key interlocutors. So this is what their parents were, this is what they are, and this is what their children are, or like I've interviewed multiple generations, and kind of occupations they are in, and the kind of property they have accumulated over the period of time. So what I argue in conclusion, that accumulation, the steady flow of economic, cultural, and social capital expands the horizon of opportunity for the third generation. So first generation, second generation are investing and rolling in the capital. So it kind of opens up the possibility for the third generation. And the proper disposition is essential for the professional middle class in Bangladesh. Families which could not keep the flow of capital consistent would lose their edge. So this is a permutation and combination. So if you lack in social capital or cultural capital, or any of them. This is like a range of partition in combination. Your children would suffer. They would actually be lagged behind by people who could invest more, like anything else. So reinvestment of accurate capital from one generation to another was a key to achieving mobility or sustaining an affluent position in Bangladesh or wherever they decided to settle in the world. The following table summarizes the accumulation of my interlocutors and reveals how they reach in their current affluent position. So this is where they reach. So if you see that this possessions were not only Bangladesh bound, but these were invested. So many of by third generation, many of my interlocutors actually have two homes, both in America. So the kind of lifestyle they would have, so I want to argue the kind of lifestyle they can afford in Bangladesh, some of them actually can afford the similar lifestyle in London or Tokyo or in New York. So that brings us to so this is how I want to conclude. Based on the above discussion, then middle class can be defined as a group of professionals with tertiary education, accumulation, and a shared set of core values. The surplus in the income and inherited possessions enable this group of individuals to be highly mobile and maintain a particular lifestyle. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So will you take questions, comments, discussion for discussion?
Yes.
So anyone has, please, speak up or raise your hand in the chat. Yes, Arpita, would you like to just speak?
Thank you, Professor Sabur, for the fantastic presentation and for touching this very, very interesting topic. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Orpita, and I am currently a PhD candidate at the University of Bristol Law School. I am also teaching at the University of Dhaka in the Department of Law. I was wondering about how you chose the methodology for your work. I understand that this is a qualitative work, but if you could kindly discuss or shed some light about how you reached out to the interlocutors, how you found them, because these are stories of very intimate values. These talk about the private lives and life stories of the people. So how did you gain the access and how did you build the trust in the process so that these people opened up to you? And you covered a very big number, which is a feat in itself. So like, if you could just kindly share your data collection process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arpita, for your question. Should we take all the questions together, or should I just answer one by one?
So I'm not seeing any other question.
Okay.
And
So
perhaps this will lead to other questions. Your answer. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Arpita, thank you for your wonderful question. The reason I couldn't finish my book is because the data set is huge and it has like multi-generational. So so I interviewed 80 people, 80 families in Bangladesh and 22 in London. So I look into the transnational connection of the middle class and upward mobility into transnational class. I actually, the thing is, I am part of this class. So I had specific issues that I wanted to look into. But being part of this class also had its trepidations because people know some of them know you, but I tried to actually cast my net wider. So I actually, so the story of this whole thesis is very interesting because I was working on middle class formation while I was doing masters, and I actually got married when I was doing my draft. It's a very personal story. I was extremely bored sitting on the stage. If you go to any wedding, you will see, and basically the idea for this whole book came from there because you get to see this like whole class is a spectacle, right? I'm sitting there and I have nothing to do. So 4 hours or 5 hours, I was trying to figure out why somebody's invited in the marriage and why they're here, because half of the people I don't know are half of the people I know, but I haven't been in touch with them. So it started from there. So it's very personal. And the thing is, like, I do not have a clear-cut answer, but what I did is that I sat with the guest list first and saw who were the people, those were invited, but I didn't interview too many of them. But I've reached out to friends and their families because I knew who were the middle class, because at onset, I decided the criteria. So I wanted to look into the professionals, people having, so I wanted to like shrink the pool. Okay, so I looked into professionals, tertiary education professionals, and possibly having multiple generations of professional experience. So that this is how I actually entered into the field. So I didn't actually interview my family that much. I probably have only one distant family member, but I reached out to friends, I talked to people, and I also had a research assistant because I wanted to compare his pool against mine and see where this interview takes us. So it's and the thing is, like, you can imagine, I have a set of demographic information and absolutely detail of this consumption pattern and everything, so possession. And the thing is, like, I was very lucky. I don't know what I did, but people actually opened up. People opened up. It's not that I targeted only old, lonely men and women, but also the young people. And I think I'm not I don't know whether I would be a very good writer, but I was a good ethnographer, I would say. I mean, like, I really enjoyed my field work. So that is how it started. So once you start talking, the balls start rolling, and somebody say, like, oh, you want to know this? So this people would be interesting. So they actually led to others. So I started with 10 or 15 people, and then I actually followed their network. And that's how I actually looked into the family genealogy and met the people in London. So because, okay, and this is also political, because I wanted to study up, not down. And I also wanted to, not coming from like a West and studying people in the South. Rather, I wanted to go there and see how we polluted the blood, like literally, how brown people are occupying the space and class formation, and what kind of relationship we have with the metropole and the colonial subject and things like that. So it's over the period of time, it grew as it grew, but it's messy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Other questions or thoughts? Yes, Munjulika, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Seuty for such an interesting paper. I think it made many of us reflect on our own social and cultural background, those of us who are from Dhaka and from Bangladesh. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. So I think towards the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about migration and people who had migrated to Dhaka and to Bangladesh from the 40s during partition. So the people that you're talking about, your interlocutors for this presentation, are they mostly Bengali Muslims who were based somewhere else and then came to Dhaka? And do you make a distinction between those who had been, for example, came from the villages in Bangladesh, and those who came from other bigger cities like Kolkata? Do you make that distinction in your research? Thank you.
I do. Thank you, Manjulika. So basically, I looked into, because there was no way of knowing what their grandparents were, or there was no way knowing, like, on set what their parents were. So I was meeting people. It was a spontaneous meeting, not so spontaneous, because I at least they were affluent middle class. I knew their profession, where they were in. But I do have a lot of among the CA. If I could share, I can inundate everyone with those Excel sheets because I have way too many people coming not only from India and other part of province, but also from different part of Bengal. But it's very interesting because even if they are not coming from Kolkata or different part of Bengal, the aspirations were very similar. Even if they were coming from trading or agrarian background, but the aspiration was to become modern. Aspiration was to be in the city. So I think it is aspiration that united them as a cluster rather than Indiani. But it so happened that 3 of my key interlocutors, so I did like 11 family, I did like a really, really long 3 generations of interviews. So each interview is like a 6 hours, 7 hours, 3 days long, like 3-4 days long. I've been there, been with these people. But I think historically it was interesting to see among 6 of them, 3 were from Kolkata, rest were not from Kolkata. So I make that distinction. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I actually had 2 questions, one related to your timeline and the other had to do with, I guess, questions of Dhaka and space. So, in your timeline, what I found kind of very important in your work is that you're going back in time from and looking at several decades, 3 generations and several decades of this, class formation. And but I was wondering that in terms of your timeline, you have basically, the 47, etc., and 71 onwards. But then what about the more recent, like 2 or 3 decades when you have, is there kind of, neoliberal capitalism and entrepreneurship and new kinds of, aspirations, I guess, that young people might have had, while growing up in the 90s onwards, which the previous generations may not have had. So that was one question regarding changes in profession and aspiration. And the second had to do with, so in Dhaka, Dhaka has, also grown so much. So while older areas may be built up and be re-inhabited, what about the expansion of the middle class into newer suburban or kind of other localities in and around Dhaka?
Okay, thank you, Daddy. So first question first, the 3rd generation that I talk about is our age. So it is about contemporary people. So I do go by generations, or at least that is how I'm organizing my chapters right now. So 3rd generation is essentially born between mid 70s, early 80s. So that is where I stop, because I do not want to like add another generation, the 4th generation, but I probably would talk about that towards the end as a conclusion. And I mentioned very briefly about how this middle class is becoming from moving away from test of senses to test of reflection. So it is an aspirational class. It's not, the definition of class is no more only economic, but what you project, how you represent yourself. So this whole neoliberal economy opened up the space for private sector development, and private sector development essentially. So if I have to pinpoint, until 80s and 90s, state was very much present in the nation building project. So until 80s, state was there. So that's why I make the comparison, even in education, is that you could have so many members of middle class because education was cheaper. I didn't pay anything for my undergrad. I actually didn't pay anything since I was in class 10. I was always on scholarship, and the not only scholarship, it used to be 10 taka monthly fees, which is nothing, right? For a farmer, it is a lot. For a late anyone from working class, it is a lot, because you still have to pay yearly 6,000 taka, which is nothing if you compare to the it's staggering, actually, the growth. But the thing is, but even my children going to the public university would probably, I would choose that, but many of my generation wouldn't choose that. So neoliberal development also means the change, shifts in education systems, shift in the kind of occupation that you are opting for. So whether you want stability and retirement plan, or whether you want a lot of money now, not having a pension or any kind of benefits. So that is the choice that you're making. And that's why this whole class is as a debt-based class rather than saving-based class. So all these transformations are actually the transformation between the third and fourth generation, second and third generations. And the other one was, I was probably, let's get back to the map. I don't know whether you can see.
No, not yet.
Okay. So if you see, so this is, let's get back. So this was the old Dhaka, right? So this is the old Dhaka. So if in reality, this is the old Dhaka. This part is the old Dhaka. Okay, so this is the Burigonga, and this part is old Dhaka, right? This is the Dhaka 2 decades ago, right? When I started the work, this is the Dhaka now. So this was the Dhaka. This much was the Dhaka when I started the work. Now this is the expansion of Dhaka, and the city is moving towards this direction. So it's only not only so it's encroaching the low-lying landfills. So like still so what used to be this used to be the CBD. Now the CBD is here. So it's moving already in the north, and probably it would go somewhere here. So somewhere here. So it's moving towards that direction. So yes, the expansion is there, and it's quite actually astonishing, the amount of the kind of growth that this country is going through. And I think it's a right time to write the book as well, because you can see the new aspiration coming. So it's and when I was writing, and I agree with you, when I was writing, I was thinking like, I'm only talking about my grandparents' generation, parents' generation, and not much about my generation, and I should get out of that. So I tried to get out of that. I don't know how much I could do, but yeah.
Thank you. Other thoughts, comments, questions?
I see my supervisor in the audience. Vinita is there.
So, Muhammad Nizamul Alam, if you would like to speak directly.
Yeah. Hi, Nazma.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Professor Sabur, for the excellent presentation. I was wondering, you mentioned about co-heading of the family, 40% of...
yes.
So how do you actually kind of see these changing factors, how the male-headed household becoming a co-headed household? Is it all about educational upward mobility, or something to do with the kind of a co-financing or contributing economically in the family?
Actually, Nazmul, thank you for your question. I think I've talked about this a little bit, is that it was the precarity of middle-class development and the kind of social transformations women were going through. I think it allowed the space for men and women to realign their gender role. So it's not only economy, but and the things like, I don't think my work is corrective to male-headed to female-headed family. I mean, like, it is probably, but I think it's important that we don't hold on to male-headed families and be open what it is. Yeah, so I don't think all the families, because even in the scholars I love Redmore's work, I love Hilary Standing's work, I actually love Mrinalini Sinha and others' work. And I probably talk about that, is that when we are constantly talking about men, associating men with the public and women with the private, we are still suffering from the Victorian hangover. The world has moved on. We have moved on. So if I look into the families the families that I showed, is not something that I wanted to present them as a radical. It was natural process that they went through. And it's not necessarily that husband died, that's why they became there are revolutionary possibilities, and that these women existed in history. A person, like, I can't imagine, it's unfathomable for me. When I was talking about Mumtaz, she actually, I didn't meet her. I met her daughter-in-law. So she was representing Pakistan in General Assembly. That was possible. So why are we always hanging on to this role that men are doing this? Men is building this nation, men are doing everything. I think the whole point of my book is partly be able to see how men and women complemented and played their role in building a nation and also a class. So not being like, burdened by the theories that we already have, and try to explore what is there, or at least listen what people have to say.
Absolutely agree. Thank you.
Sinha, would you like to?
Hi, hello everyone. Hi Seuty, how are you?
Hi Vinita, can I see your face?
Sorry, it's 11:30 at night. I'd rather not.
Sorry, I'm touched because
you can see me later. You can see me later. Thank you so much, Seuty, for a lovely presentation. It's been lovely to hear you and to see how much your thesis has traveled, and in such innovative directions too. So, but I had a couple of things I wanted to say, and this is one that we both struggled with while you were writing the thesis, and I guess this is something that still perhaps one needs to think through and resolve, and that's the sort of conjoining of affluence with middle classness, right? That's something that may raise questions in many minds, right? I mean, what is the conceptual value of continuing to use the descriptor middle class when you're really talking about a cluster that is more than affluent, right? So that was one thing. And then the other thing I wanted to hear your thoughts about was actually the gendered dimension of middle classness, right? I know you talked about it in your earlier response to the question, but you've centered women firmly in your thesis, and I just wondered whether women's narratives, about being a member of this class differed significantly from the male narratives that you heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinita. So, yeah, I'm still struggling with affluenza. But I think I've come to terms with the fact that this is a class, and I'm talking about intergenerational accumulation. And so it's like putting it in piggy bank. So if you put like over the generations, sometimes it won't be middle class anymore. It would be affluence class. And I think my thesis is heading towards the affluent class in making, or elite in making. That is where my thesis would end, my book would end. So I'm trying to resolve that issue as such. So that is first thing. Second thing is men and women see their class position very differently. And it's not about the obsession with women, but it was really, really difficult for make men talk. And I went back to them, and I was looking into my data, and I went back to my field in 2000, just before COVID. I was talking to the same people again and again, and men actually didn't have much to say, but women had a lot of things to say. They wanted to claim the space, and I actually, I enjoyed, and I'm trying to process the same thing that I've been, and you can see the way I wrote my thesis and the articulation has changed over the period of time. It's similar. It still have the same material, but it's reflected differently. And I think that is the beauty of longitudinal study, because I had the chance to go back to the people, and men actually thought like they earned money, they saved enough, they contributed to the family, and it has become what it is. And especially the cases that I was mentioning was some men were very, very, I would say, I was pleasantly surprised to see them acknowledging the companionship that they had, and one of the cases which I had in my original chapter is talking about how about the Ahmed Kabir's family. So talking about how women, his wife Najma actually made him what he is. She is the one who guided him to become what it is. The accumulation was possible because of that. So I see some acknowledgement from the men, but I think it's more of women talking about their position, what they have struggled through, what they have become, what they have achieved, and how they want to be remembered. I think one of the things that really the last field visit was about, because all of these women are turning 70, and there's late 70s, early 80s, some are older, and how they want to remember, how they want to be remembered by other people. And I think they want to be remembered as resilient individual who survived through it all. That's how it is. And let's see how it goes.
Thank you, Seuty. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, I'll see you soon.
Other comments or thoughts?
Dina asked a question, I can see.
Yes, do your interlocutors identify as middle class? This is from Dina Siddiqui.
Yes, thank you, Dinapa. Yes, they do. It's very interesting. They're affluent, and they're living in their mansion in Gulshan, but they think that at the core they are middle class, and they always remember the struggle and how they achieved and where they have reached in life, but they do identify as middle class or affluent middle class.
So how big is how big is the middle class in your definition? I mean, in terms of, these people are clearly quite affluent, the ones you discussed, but what's let's say the lower rung of the middle class in your mapping?
This is a tricky question, Nadia. I don't think I should answer this question. Because it's size is always troubling, but it's safe to say that there's a dominant section of middle class, and it's and also at some point of my book talks about the fight between the old values and the new values, the aspirational class who enter into the years. So these are the old guard, the families that I've talked about. These are the old guard who managed to keep the capital accumulation rolling. Most of them. These are the old money people. But new money is fighting, and they're competing to occupy the space. So I actually can't say the exact number of the size, but I would say substantial. And it's not about the number; it's about the strength in ideology and space they occupy. And imagine it's a greed, like this whole class is greed. The permutation and combination would put each person like each generation a little higher or a little lower, and it's ever evolving. It's a present perfect continuous tense.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? So in that case, please join me in thanking our speaker today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Iftikhar. Thanks everyone for coming and listening to me and to my ideas, because this, as I say, this is the chapter which I just finished writing yesterday. So it was absolutely new, and thanks for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for attending.